Welcome to today's reading. Welcome to the Northwest Author Series, a series that I just recently found out has been going on since 2008, I believe. And by the way, I'm Doug Sagano, one of the many volunteers here. Today's event is special because we're being supported by Literary Arts, which is a wonderful nonprofit in Portland that supports uh, arts programs and programs for writers, such as the Portland Book Festival, the Oregon Book Awards and fellowships, and writing classes and youth programs. Um, and I just found out that Literary Arts just moved into a new home where you're
We
moving
will be
to
moving,
office
yeah,
soon
this summer.
in
to
Southeast.
yeah, on
Yeah.
Southeast Grand, yeah.
So welcome, and I'd like to introduce Susan Moore, who is the director of the programs for writers at Literary Arts. One reminder, we have a reader next month, Lily Liu, who will be coming on May 11th. Thanks for coming.
Hi, thanks for being here. I'm Susan with Literary Arts. Thanks to the Cannon Beach Library and to this series and Doug for hosting us, and thanks to you all for being here. I'm really excited to be here today with the 2023 Oregon Book Award winner, Sindya Bhanoo. She's the winner of the Ken Kesey Award in Fiction for her story collection, Seeking Fortune Elsewhere. And as Doug said, she's here as part of the Oregon Book Awards author tour. And the Book Awards is a program of literary arts. You already said such great things about us. So all I can say is our mission is to engage readers, support writers, and inspire the next generation with great literature. We present the Oregon Book Awards every year for some of the finest writing by Oregon's authors. Authors send us our books. We send them out to judges across the country, and they come back with their decisions about the winners and finalists. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Sindya now. Sindya Bhanoo is currently an assistant professor at Oregon State University in Corvallis. She teaches creative writing and journalism. She's also worked as a reporter for the New York Times and the Washington Post. And in 2020, she was a Knight Wallace Reporting Fellow at the University of Michigan. And she said in a recent interview, "I knew from a very young age that I was always interested in people's stories, and I had this awareness that people don't know each other's stories." And Shruti Swami was one of the judges for the Oregon Book Awards, and she had this to say about her book. In the 8 elegantly constructed stories that comprise Sindya Bhanoo's collection, fortune proves elusive to her searching characters. South Indian families split between continents, each haunted by the other's absence. Seeking fortune elsewhere moves with the quest assurance of a sneaker wave that leaves you suddenly drenched and glad. I want you to appreciate the sneaker wave reference. Please join me in welcoming Sindya.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you to Literary Arts and to Cannon Beach Library. And Doug, thank you for helping bring me here. I was just at the Oregon Book Awards event less than 2 weeks ago, I think. So there are a new set of winners who will be going on tour soon with Susan, which has just been such a great experience for me to see parts of Oregon and share my book with readers around the state. So my plan, in case you like to know the plan like my students do, is to introduce my book and talk for a little bit, and then I'll read an excerpt from one story and then talk a little bit more and then read another short excerpt from a different story. And then I'd love to have a conversation with all of you. So this book, Seeking Fortune Elsewhere, it's a collection of 8 stories. 4 stories are set in the United States and 4 stories are set in India. And the stories are about immigrants from South India. My parents immigrated from South India in the late 70s to Philadelphia, and I was born here after that. And the stories set in India are about family members who stayed behind, who were left behind. The book kind of moves back and forth. The first story has characters from India and the US. The second story also touches both countries, and in between it kind of goes back and forth. I was a newspaper reporter for a long time and worked for various publications, like Susan said. And early on, I had a sense that there were some limitations to reporting, that I could only explore a story in a certain way. And I really had tremendous experiences. I would step into people's lives for a period of time, and I got to go onto fishing boats and to Amish farms and into prisons, and really see the country and the world in a way that you don't as a tourist. And people open their doors, and it was very moving, but always the focus was the newspaper story, which has limited room for the characters, for the people. And there's a lot about everyday experiences and quiet moments that that the newspaper does not have space for. So I started to have that realization as time went by, and eventually I took a step back from reporting. My daughter, who just turned 13 a couple weeks ago, was born, and I was home a little bit more, and not reporting out in the field as much. And I thought I would just try writing little character sketches. So I started writing these little, not quite stories, but maybe pieces of stories, or like they were like scraps. And I was just experimenting, and I was also thinking about stories that are not in the record, that the historical record has not captured. And I felt that the stories of immigrants like my parents were not in the record. Their experience of moving from India to the United States is not something that you would read about in a newspaper, but there is a lot of material there that I thought deserved some space somewhere and belonged in the archive. So that was on my mind. The limitations of journalism, where character cannot be fully explored in the way that I wanted to explore it, where there isn't space for day-to-day experiences that people have. So all of that sort of started to come together, and I started writing these stories. And by then I had worked as a reporter for some number of years. I went to UC Berkeley and did a graduate degree there. So I already had a degree, a master's degree. But at the age of 35, I went back and did an MFA, and my kids were very young. But it was an amazing experience. My undergraduate degree is in computer science, and I didn't have the chance to take many literature classes or writing classes. And suddenly I had these ideas that were starting to come together about what I wanted to write about. And then I got to read a range of writers, but discover writers who were not writing the same stories as me, but who were exploring similar topics through their writing, or paying attention to things that I also thought were important to pay attention to in stories. And there are so many kinds of books and so many kinds of writers and readers, as there should be, but that MFA experience was special because of that. And so writers like William Trevor and Alice Munro and Elizabeth Strout really spoke to me and were at my side as I wrote the stories in this book. So I thought I would read, so the first story that I often read from. It's the very first story in the book. It's called Maliga Homes, and it's set in a fictional retirement community in South India. And these sorts of retirement communities were not so common in India a decade ago, certainly not 2 decades ago. they are here, but the culture in India was for the elderly to live with their children, but children have left and moved to other parts of the country or gone abroad over the years to pursue new opportunities. And so these retirement communities have become necessary and important. And this story is told from the perspective of a widow who lives in one of them, called Malika Holmes. And um, what else do you need to know? That may be all you need to know. And this I have reported in India as well. I've gone from here to do stories in India several times, and this I felt could have been a news story, but I was interested in exploring the widow's perspective very closely. And like I said, paying attention to her day-to-day life, and also trying to capture on the page maybe the loneliness that these people might be experiencing, each of them, as they live in this community together. So I'll read from the beginning, just the first couple pages. Malika Holmes. Mr. Swaminathan died as he was walking back to his flat from the veg dining hall after dinner. He was ahead of me on the path, and I saw him slow down. His gait changed from a fast stride to a slower, hunched walk. His left arm went limp. He lost his footing and crumpled to the ground. If I had not been swift, I imagine, he would have hit his head on the concrete. There would have been blood. But I caught up with him. Before he fell, I squatted to the ground and put my hands out, and his head fell directly into my open palms. Carefully, I slipped my hands out, set his head gently on the concrete, and sat at his side talking to him. His left eye looked lower than his right. His left cheek sagged as if it might slide off. I held his hand until the ambulance arrived. It was the first time that I had held a man's hand since my husband died. The rectangular diamond on Mr. Swaminathan's gold ring was hard and cold in contrast to his warm skin. Before they loaded his body onto the gurney, he opened his eyes, looked at me, and said, "Renuka." Then he squeezed my hand. Whether he was asking me to summon his wife, or whether he thought I was his wife, I cannot say. He died before he reached the hospital. He was 75 years old today, the same age my husband would be if he were alive today. His death was our first. Hard to believe since this is a place for old people. But Malika Homes is a new facility, and the first residents, myself included, moved in just 2 years ago. The other day, I spoke to my daughter Kamala on the phone and told her how expertly the personnel handled the whole Swaminathan matter. They were prompt in calling for help. The area was cleared immediately, and the ambulance rolled right onto the freshly trimmed landscaping, crushing a row of golden dewdrop shrubs that took a year to grow. I am so glad to hear that, Kamala said. Malika Homes is not a bad place. It is a rather nice place, in fact, just a bit isolated for city people like me, coming from places like Chennai and Bangalore. The facility sits at the intersection of Tambur Road and NH 181, just outside of Coimbatore. Going to the outskirts of a mid-sized city gave the developers more space and allowed them to invest in luxuries that we all appreciate. We have stone tiles in the bathrooms, thermofoil cabinets, those wood laminate floors that are in style now, picturesque landscaping, and Honda inverter generators with 8 hours of runtime for when the power goes out, which it does daily. I am lucky to be here, my Kamala likes to remind me. It is only the second place of its kind in South India, and the units sold out quickly. Still, no amount of expensive stone or carefully worded praise for my daughter can change what Mulliga Homes is, a place for those who have nowhere else to go. We are of the upper middle class here. We do not come from families who own hospitals or factories or vast tracts of land. We work for those people, worked for those people. Those people belong to a different cut entirely and will never move here, no matter how beautifully our gardeners maintain the bougainvillea vines and the oleander shrubs. Those people will stay in their posh city flats with their many servants, with their children nearby. The offspring of the rich are rich, and they do not seek their fortunes elsewhere. Like me, nearly every resident of Maliga Homes has lost sons and daughters to foreign. That is the reason we live in a retirement community come old age home rather than with our families. My Kamala left India 25 years ago. She's a deputy managing director of a company called Synchro Systems in the Atlanta area. Renika Swaminathan also has two children living abroad, one in Germany and one in Australia. They must have arrived already to help with Mr. Swaminathan's Kadiam preparations. I am knitting a sweater made of fine green mohair for Renika. After the Kadiam, she's going to Adelaide to spend time with her son. I was the one who said, better to go. It is depressing to be alone right after. Her son is the manager of a movie theater there. He was not able to finish his graduate degree at the University of Adelaide, but somehow found a way to stay in the country. Good for him, I said when Renika told me. I meant it. Those of us at Maliga Homes with children in America rank higher than those with children in Dubai or Qatar. Somewhere in between fall those with children working in Singapore, Australia, England, Germany, and the rest of Western Europe. Africa falls below the Middle East because of what people imagine it is like there, and because it is so hard to get to. What our children do, how much money they make, whether our grandchildren are bright or mediocre, all of this matters. It is a tragedy to have a brilliant child and a dunce of a grandchild. The yarn for Renika's sweater cost me 4 rupees per gram, much more than I typically pay, but I decided it was worth it. The sweater will bring out the green in her eyes, and it will be good for the Australian winter. I checked the climate in Adelaide on the net. It can drop down to 10 degrees, but also death turns you cold, and I want Renika to stay warm. In the months after my husband died, a chilliness plagued my being, even in hot weather. My husband's death was what brought me to Maliga Homes. After he died, Kamala flew to India and spent 2 weeks with me in our Chennai flat. She insisted that I leave my red bottu on my forehead and keep all my jewelry on. This is not the end of life for you, Amma. I don't believe in such things, she said. I did insist on taking off my toe rings. I never liked them. Initially, they would not come off. Kamala tried to help and gave up. They had been on for 45 years, the silver rings tightening around my toes as I became fatter over the decades, my flesh curling over their edges. Finally, after soaking my feet in soapy water for 30 minutes, I had success. Kamala collapsed on our cane sofa, the same one she spent years reading on as a teenager. Her legs leisurely stretched out while she held Somerset Maugham high above her head. Her eye makeup was smeared from crying. Both of us had done a lot of that. Amma, come lie down with me, she said, a cricket ball in one hand and a brochure in the other. My husband loved cricket, and she had been carrying the ball around with her since her arrival. Move, I said. We lay squished on the sofa, side by side, hip to hip, mother and daughter. It's called Mulliga Homes, she said. She handed me a brochure. Look how nice the grounds are, like Brindavan Gardens. The brochure was from Kamala's friend in America, Padmini Venugopal. Padmini's parents had just moved into Mulliga Homes. All the comforts of home without any worry, and so many friends, Kamala read out loud. She looked at me eagerly. Consider it, she said. What friends? You will make them. Are you telling me what to do? What if I had stopped you all those years ago from going to America alone? I asked. This is not the same thing, she said. She sat up and climbed over me to get off the sofa. It is not the same thing at all. The following night, I had a small fall in the bathroom. Though I was not seriously injured, Kamala became unstoppable. I could hear the determination in her voice, like when she was a girl and wanted a peach melba from Joffers on Mount Road. She would not stop until I relented. You are my responsibility now, she said. She was combing my hair because I sprained my right wrist in the fall and could not do it myself. I've already made a booking. I paid the deposit today. I'll stop there with that story. It goes on, and you learn a little bit more about the characters in at this retirement community and what they're going through. And the narrator tells a little lie to make herself feel better towards the end of the story. So I wanted to also talk about another story in the book called Amma. And Amma is, it's based on the life, it's the only story actually which is based on a historical figure. I mean, she's from recent times. She died really not long ago, but it's based on a movie star. She was the biggest South Indian movie star of her time. And she later became a really powerful politician. She was the mistress to a movie star, and then he became a politician, and then she became a politician, taking his place after he died. And this was in the 1960s that she was a star. So it was very unusual trajectory for her to then become a politician. She died a few years ago when I was working on this collection, and I read her obituary, and I was really fascinated by it. And as a child, when I would go to India, sometimes in Chennai, which is referenced in this story as well, traffic would be blocked, and you would see like a row of cars, a row of ambassadors, and everyone would be stuck, and there would be the row of cars. And so I would hear like the adults talking, and they would say Jay Lalita's in one of those cars. So it's basically her caravan. You don't know which one she's in, and like the whole city had to stop while she crossed. So that's all I knew about her, that when I would go visit my grandparents, that occasionally we'd be stuck in traffic because of this. And she was like the equivalent of the governor of the state of Tamil Nadu. She was the chief minister. So that's all I knew about her. But I read her obituary, and there were all these weird facts about her life that I didn't know, unusual things, and I thought it would make a fascinating story to try to tell that in a fictionalized way. So I had that idea. And then I started thinking about telling the story from the point of view of the girls that she would have gone to school with. She came from a sort of, average family, and she went to a regular school, and she went to a convent school where all the girls wore the same outfits and had their hair tied the same way with ribbons. So I thought how interesting it would be for them to tell her story. And as she ages, they also age, and they would be sort of seeing her in a certain way. So that was the premise of the story. But a question maybe, that I have for all of you, and I'm happy to give you my perspective. Is the whole thing I wrote is fiction. I don't know any of the people who were her classmates. It's imagined, but this is a real person from real life. And I'm a journalist, and there's another version of myself that pays very close attention to fact and never veers from fact. And so I guess my question for all of you, if you're writers, but also as readers, is what you think that fiction owes fact, and whether it owes anything at all. And it's something on my mind as a writer, but I'd be curious, especially if you're a reader of historical fiction, how maybe you think about that. But I'll read from Amma, but I won't read in order. I've kind of pieced together the story, and there's a sort of conflict among the girls when they're young that you won't hear about in what I read, and it's about Cadbury's chocolates that go missing, fruit and nut, if you like Cadbury's, and something that happens to this girl who becomes the actress. They're not very nice to her when she's in school, but I'm sort of reading excerpts of it, so you get a sense of how they think about her. Amma. Before all of this, before they prostrated at her feet, before she wore large, round, dark red buttus with light red namams on her forehead, she was one of us. Before she became chief minister, before she became a star, she was our classmate at Sacred Heart Girls' School in Church Park. We knew her before it all started, we still like to say. She was Jaya. We know the stories. One artist used 5 liters of his own blood frozen to make a life-size sculpture of her head. A police superintendent cut his fingertips off and delivered them to the Ganesh temple, praying, "May my sacrifice result in her re-election." A martial arts teacher asked his students to drive nails through his hands and feet, made a speech in praise of her, and then fainted. When she saw the video, she wrote the teacher a handwritten letter. "Please never do that again." He touched the letter to his cheek and framed it. She appeals to the fisherman, the rickshaw driver, the bricklayer. Her devotees are of all types, children, women, men, so many men. They consider her beyond human, a shimmering goddess, their heroine, indestructible. We know who she became. She was the greatest actress of her time, mistress to the biggest Hollywood star of our era, the heroine of 28 of his films. When her beloved quit films and became the chief minister of Tamil Nadu, she, not his wife, was his escort to every convention, every gala, every state dinner. He died. She ran for office. She won. Cinema star, mistress, politician, and amma to an entire state for nearly as long as we had our children in our homes, but we knew her when we were children ourselves. As she began her acting career, the rest of us were college students, still living with our parents. 8 of us went to Women's Christian College, and we met for lunch daily under the white silk cotton tree, each of us sitting on one of its thick exposed roots. It was impossible not to talk about her. She had graduated first in our class and was offered a full merit scholarship to Stella Maris. Not one of us received anything close to such an opportunity, but she took a movie offer instead and did not even attend convocation. She was slender at the waist by then, with luscious hips, the baby fat completely rearranged. She had pimples, but makeup fixed that. As the class of 1966 walked nervously across the stage to collect our diplomas, her image was already on billboards, kilometers of her midriff visible, her lips half open, her eyes in a sidelong glance towards all the pedestrians of Madras. Posters of her films were plastered on the walls, on wooden signposts. We watched her films with our parents, with our friends, whenever we could spare the 3 rupees. We tuned into Radio Ceylon on our crackly transistor radios in the evenings, so we could listen to her songs as we helped our mothers prepare dinner. She was on page 3 often, once pictured with her thick black hair in a long braid, clad in a rose-colored Mysore silk sari that sold out at Nully the week after. When you know someone like Jaya, know her from back then, when she was pudgy and wore a uniform and 2 plaits tied with white ribbons, just like you, seeing her on the big screen is different for you than it is for anyone else. You imagine that you are her and that she is you. You know her. You look at her bangs, the curls on her forehead. You watch how she slides her bare arm across a grand piano while her co-star plays with quick moving fingers. You watch the way she blinks, slowly, the way she dances under a waterfall and gets drenched. You wonder how it is that her hair gets wet, but her makeup stays intact. You watch her lover put his hand on the wet, bare skin of her waist, just above where her sari's inskirt is tied. When you get home from the theater, you snip your hair, try to curl it with your pencil, then you slide your arms across the windowsill. Your father walks by, gives you a peculiar look, and says, "God help you." He sees the college textbook you have open, its pages unmarked and unread. I hope you passed biology. Before you take off your clothes to bathe, you take a mug full of cold water, pour it over yourself, and then look down at your body. Then you add the hot water to the bucket so you can take a bath. Only then do you take your clothes off, wring the water out of them. You put your own hand on your own bare skin, right where it curves inward, just above the hip joint. You imagine you are her. You do this, and you are young, like Jaya. You do not know that you will do this again much later when you are old and she is in jail. She went to jail. When your waist is no longer as firm and small and arched as it once was. We were married, every one of us, by the age of 23, college degrees secured or not. Almost all of us had children. We did not gather in those days. There was no time even to write or post letters. But we watched her films, all her films. She played us in her films. A woman with a philandering husband, a housewife with children, a housewife without children, a mentally unstable woman, a philandering woman. Other times she played people we could only imagine, an island princess, an undercover CBI agent. We needed to see Jaya that way, glamorous and desirable and still human. We were in that stage of life and motherhood that is filled with fatigue, unimaginable to the young, forgotten by the old, unknown altogether to those without children. We spent our days washing tiny bottoms, wiping hot, fresh vomit off the floors, pulling wooden combs through knotty hair, picking lice, unclogging nostrils. We shouted often, "Brush your teeth, take a bath, pack your books." We poured idli and dosa batter with urgency, desperate to feed our children before we pushed them out the door. We filled water bottles and tied shoelaces. 2 o'clock came too soon, and then we had to prepare a snack and keep milk ready and make fresh tiffins for the evening. Some of us had help. Some of us had more of it than others. At night, when our aching backs searched for comforting positions on our stiff cotton-stuffed mattresses, we imagined that Jaya's bedroom was like a suite in a grand Taj hotel. We uttered these thoughts to our husbands in the dead of the night, our sleeping children sandwiched in our bed. Someone must massage her feet with expensive lotion. Her tea appears at her bedside. She has no children who tug on her pallu every 5 minutes. Our husbands, tired and groggy from their long days at work, did not entertain our fantasies about her, though perhaps they had their own. Sounds nice, they said, before turning their bodies away from us, leaving us wide-eyed and staring at the ceiling. The loneliness must kill her, we whispered to ourselves as the ceiling fans above us swung around and around. With each turn of the fan, we saw her smiling face, her scheming wink, a madwoman, a secretary, a village belle. It takes a decade, or maybe 2, but eventually you no longer wish to be her. You no longer want her to be you. You are happy being yourself, or resigned, or too afraid to be anyone but yourself. When you see her on the billboards or on the television that you now own, you feel sorry for her. You have a daughter and a husband, or you are a widow, but at least you have a son. Perhaps your husband has a mistress, but at least he spends half his time with you. Or you have no children, and you cannot speak, but you have a small home, and you love the man who lives in it, and he loves you. Her lover is dead. He never once publicly acknowledged their relationship. At his funeral, when his body was being carried through the streets, she walked alongside his head, a clear insult to his wife, who was by his feet. His nephew told Jaya to move. When she did not, he pushed her and she fell. We saw it all on live television, her real life, a tragic film of its own. She was a star, but she had no idea what it was like to have a sleeping baby's hand grip her finger for hours at a time. She did not know the feeling of opening the door each afternoon to beautiful children holding brown cloth book bags, their stray hairs sweaty and sticky against their foreheads. I'll stop there with that story. It takes you through the trial. She's arrested for various charges are made against her, and also the story of her childhood with these girls unfolds as we move along. And this story took me a long time to revise, and what I realized originally, what I was thinking was that these girls would tell the story of the movie star and politician, but as the story evolved, that actually their storytelling was just a vehicle for me and ideally for the reader to understand the girls and then the women who are telling the story. And the way they speak about her, I discovered as I was writing it, taught me more about them than it actually did about her. And that idea kind of became clear to me, the fact that the way we speak about other people actually tells us more about us than it does, or at least as much than it does about the person or people that we're talking about. And that collective we voice started to come together, and there are parts of the story when the we becomes a you, and that's because as I was writing it, I had to implicate these girls, but I also had to implicate myself. And in some ways, I'm also implicating the reader and pulling them in. And as when I'm writing, there's an important part of my process where, I mean, I usually start with a kernel, some sort of idea. It could be an image, it could be something that I've read in a newspaper article. It's not usually a place, it's usually a character and some sort of image about a character. And that allows me to enter a fictional world and gather material. And I do that in sort of like a a note-taking manner, as I did when I was a reporter. So I was just sort of like jot things down about this world and how characters are interacting, um, and what's going on. But always there's a point, and I come back to my desk and I piece the story together, and that becomes the first draft. And I finally have a sense for what the story might be. I first get a sense for who the characters are, and I don't think this is the case for all writers. I think that writers have different approaches, but I first get a sense for the character and then get a sense for what the story is. And actually, my goal in creating the story is to convey to the reader and understand myself who the character is. I think that's my primary focus in telling stories and writing stories. So that's my process. And then I can see, when I have the draft, I can finally see what the story might be and then start tweaking. Like, um, I talk about it often as sort of a constellation that starts to become clear to me, and then I know where I need to brighten things and where I need to dim things, and that's where maybe certain parts of the story need to be cut out, so that it's not that they're not there or not part of the world, but they're not part of this particular story that I'm telling. And so that's the process of revision. But there is a moment, and a story never feels perfectly done, but the moment when I can kind of see a character from different angles, where I'm not just seeing the good in them or the evil in them, but where I can see actually both of those things and everything in between, is when I kind of have a breakthrough in the storytelling process. But in order to even get there, I need to also see that in myself. There's a reflection back. And so with this particular story, where these girls are experiencing something that looks like um, envy and jealousy, but also admiration, I had to find that in myself, which is the worst and best parts of me too. And it's a moving experience, but it's also um, what I have to do almost every time in order to kind of push a story um, into the realm that I want it to be in, and where it doesn't feel flat and artificial, but like something very real. So I'll stop there, and I would love to answer any questions or be in conversation with you about anything you want to talk about.
Do you ever take a story from you've got certain characters' viewpoints, and then take those same characters and maybe take another character within the story, that viewpoint? For instance, would you take her viewpoint sometime and do a story on that?
I've thought about it. That the first story I read from is written from this widow's point of view, and she has this daughter Kamala, and later a granddaughter named Vina is mentioned. And in my next collection, there's a whole story about the granddaughter. So potentially there could be a story about the daughter as well. But I haven't written a set of linked stories, or at least closely linked stories. So one of the girls in the Amma story, one of the many girls telling the story, does have her own story in this collection. It's called Number 16 Model House Road. And there's but it's not closely linked, but a reader paying close attention would catch that. So she has her own story about a house that her family is doing something with. Yeah. Yes.
How long since you've been to India, and what kind of changes have you seen happen over time?
I first went to India in 1985, so I was 4 years old, I think, when I went. And so for a period of time when I would go, it seemed very similar every time when I went. And America and India felt like vastly different places. Like it was like a completely different world. And I think that was part of my um, partly why I was attracted to telling stories and becoming a journalist. And I knew then, I mean, my relatives in India would have all these questions about like everything, like peanut butter and schools and like what does the floor look like? And I knew too that my classmates in America, some of them had never left the state. I lived in Washington State. And some people had their entire families within 2 hours of them, and flights were expensive at that time. So people, and now flights have become much cheaper and people actually do travel quite a bit. But and we as a family only went to India. That was the one place that we traveled to. So very different. And India was not, my family, my grandparents didn't live in a big city. So we would go to what was then Madras, now is Chennai. We'd fly there, and then it was like bumpy roads. There's a story at the end of the book, Three Trips, which is based on my first, trip to India, what it felt like when I landed there. So it was not super developed. The economy was not open. So the cities had many things that you might find in the West, but smaller towns didn't. And America was not the big thing was that America was not present in India. And then I went back in 2002, I think, or 2003, after a long gap, almost 10 years. And there was McDonald's and Pizza Hut and Subway and American companies everywhere, uh, and American culture has infiltrated Indian society. Shopping malls, I mean, there were no, and now there are these huge malls, and so that is a big change. And I think that over the course of my childhood, I've seen that change. I've also seen a lot of change in the role of women in India. I think that most of my aunts didn't work, but all of my cousins have or do, and they are well educated and they have high paying jobs, rivaling their husbands' salaries. So that has been a major change. And there's also a lot of India in the United States, and that was not the case in the 80s for sure, and not so much in the 90s. But Trader Joe's sells Indian food. You see Indian American actors and actresses on television shows. Their television shows entirely about Indian families. None of those things none of that was the case when I was young. And actually, I don't think that I could have imagined a world where all of that would come to be. Yeah. Yes.
Is there any, are there any Tamil writers, or are there Indian writers that you think of as influencing your work?
My work?
Yeah.
Not so much. And I was just telling Doug that I'm starting to try to introduce more literature and translation to my students. And I think that I went to an MFA program in Austin, Texas, and most of my teachers studied at Iowa Writers Workshop, and I had an amazing experience and great mentorship, and I really appreciated that time. And I've also come to realize that I am now sort of cut from that cloth, like they have come from Iowa, and there's certain writers that are read at Iowa, and that sort of style of writing has been passed down. The sort of thoughts about like what makes a story good has also been inherited. And so I'm trying to disrupt that a little bit by reading literature and translation. There's a Tamilian writer named Perumal Murugan, who's won a lot of awards recently, and his work has been translated in recent years. So yeah, I actually haven't read the work of many Tamilian writers. Other questions? Yeah.
Any of your Indian relatives come to this country
Uh-huh.
and studied whatever, and do they still live here? Did they go back to India?
My dad was the first person to come from either side of the family, and he did his PhD in the United States and then stayed. He's a professor. And for years, nobody from my family came. We were the only ones, and we would always go back to visit. But the tech boom has brought some of my cousins now to the US. And it's interesting because when my dad came, and this is a story that many immigrants will tell, but you have a small amount of US dollars, like $25 or $50, and you don't know, like, how do you get from the airport to the place you need to stay? Do you have a place to stay? And there wasn't much information, and there wasn't an easy way to communicate at that time. And so my dad experienced that. And now there's so much on the internet. You could go to YouTube and say, what do I need to know if I'm moving from Chennai to Iowa City? And then you'd probably get like a video that tells you exactly what you need to do. Or so it's very different, I think. And also the buying power is different. People in India have much more money now than they did then, um, and it's a modern country. The transition is not as dramatic, and there's a larger Indian community here that you could step in and help. But it was almost like every immigrant then was doing the same thing over and over again, and there was no archive of information where you could go and look things up. So in recent years, a number of my cousins have come, and some have gone back. I think that too is a newer thing where you can have a very comfortable life in India too, and so it's a decision that some people take to return. Yeah.
When do you write? You are a professor and you have a family
Yeah.
and a lot going on. So you've shared some of your process. What does it look like when you're actively working on some fiction?
Mhm. The morning has been the best time to write, and if I can get myself to do it before I start my other work for the day, and it has become very clear to me that most things can wait. The work that I do have, I have to respond to students, and I have administrative work and all these things, but I think the academic life is set up so that you can take that time and set your schedule. And if so, first thing is the best time to write, you can make it first thing. Sometimes I'm making an excuse to not write and, like saying like, well, I should get all these things out of the way, because those things are easier in a certain way. Someone's waiting for an answer and I can do it. And then, and teaching too is incredibly rewarding. And also you could put all your time into teaching. So, and always become a better and better teacher. So I'm sort of learning how to keep that balance, but I have a good schedule, and I think Oregon State has been a great place for me. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wonder, as you teach creative writing, like what is the most misunderstood assumption or just thing that you push against the most with your students in terms of their expectations and what they think about in terms of their own writing?
Huh. Do you mean in the actual work or in the publishing industry?
Probably just maybe both, like their ideas about what it takes, what revision entails, or just anything that you feel like comes up against that you come up against that you have to kind of.
The thing I worry about, because I'm in the institution, is that I think it's really important for writers to know that the institution does not have the answers, nor does it have the stories. And so if you come to do your MFA, there are a lot of things you can do. You can read new writers, you can be in conversation with your peers. You can get help with your stories, but that help is a certain kind of help, and it is not the story itself, and that all of that comes from outside the classroom, away from the university, away from the teacher, and it's something that only the writer can discover. And I think it's really very important for MFA students in particular to remember that a lot of the work is done. A lot of the work is done at the desk, but a lot of the work is also done in the off hours and off the page, and thinking about what it is that interests the writer, what it is that you're trying to understand about the world. Otherwise, the story will just never, ever be good. It will never be powerful. And it's important for MFA students to do that, to know that. And it's also important for every writer who does not have an MFA, who's interested in writing, to also know that almost everything you need to become a writer is with you. It's not somewhere else. It's not something that I can give someone. It's not something that the best, most prolific writer can give someone. So that really comes from within the person, and it's a constant process of thinking about what it is that you are really interested in, or what it is that you don't understand, or what it is that matters to you in the world. So that's something I think is important, and it's easy to get caught up with, I have to generate so many pages, and that's what makes a book. That is part of what makes it. Yeah.
So you were in journalism and you wanted to develop your character more.
Yeah.
And so you went into short story. Why not a novel? How did you end up in short story?
I would love to write a novel. My agent would love for me to write a novel.
Is there one in the drawer?
I hope so. It's interesting to me. I think when I went to go do my MFA, I thought that was what one needed to do. That was the big thing to do, is to write like the great, big, beautiful, epic novel. But I was writing all these stories also, and that's what I found most compelling. I mean, that's what I kind of stayed up at night thinking about and thought about during the day. Like, what are these really like day-to-day moments like, and can I zoom in really like to one kind of sliver of a person's life and examine it as closely as possible? And so I found that really compelling, and maybe, but more like practically, I think that length of story is attractive to me in some way. I was a journalist, but I was also a newspaper reporter, and so I did write slices. Like I never became a long form writer or a long form magazine writer, and there is a part I'm trying to face that fear like right now as I stand here. But there is a part of me.
Journalism, you stuck to news articles.
I wrote features. I was
You wrote-
mostly enterprise feature. Yeah, and mostly enterprise reporter writing feature stories. But still, it's a snapshot. It's not sort of like a big piece where I embedded myself, in a certain topic for months. I think that at most it was weeks at a time. So there's a natural like ending to a short story. It doesn't go on for 350 pages. And
in that one short story,
yeah.
the girls
Uh-huh.
are a mess.
Yeah.
You never identify any of them.
Uh-huh.
If you were writing a novel,
Uh-huh.
you think you would identify some of them and try to develop their characters?
Yeah, I think so. And I didn't read those parts. I identify a couple of them, but mostly they are a we. And I think that that would be a great way to
It's
expand.
an easier way to write.
Yeah.
To not identify.
Right, but that is, yeah, that's if I were to expand the story, that's one expansion possibility. Yeah. Yes.
Last question.
Okay.
Do you have much time for reading? And when you do, who do you read? What authors? Indian authors? American authors?
Yeah, I try to read a wide range of things, especially because I'm a teacher and I encounter a wide range of styles as well, not just my style or not just the style I'm most attracted to, but a wide range. But right now I'm reading Covenant of Water, and Abraham Varghese is an Indian American, right? You like it? You read it? Or, okay, and he's coming to Portland. Susan is bringing him to Literary Arts on November 20, in end of November.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith, which I hadn't read before. It's very beautiful. So I try different things. A book that I taught recently is called The Magical Language of Others, which is a memoir by E.J. Coe. And memoir, I think, is a really powerful way for a fiction writer to understand the psychology of a character. And it's a beautiful book. She lives in Seattle, and she just had a novel come out called The Liberators. But
I read it.
oh,
It's
you have?
great.
Oh,
I
good.
loved it. It was, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know her. The Seattle Public Library has this, the Peak Picks.
Oh, yes. It was one of
And
them.
it was just such a delight.
Yeah. And she's a beautiful writer. She's a poet. So she pays very close attention to, she puts pressure, I think, on every word. And it's apparent in her memoir too,
Yes.
which is, yeah, beautiful.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Let's thank her.
Yeah.
Ellen has her book for sale if you'd like to purchase one. And I'm sure you'd love to sign